make it there and can make it back.
Salutations and shit, folks. Welcome back to another episode of your favorite travel podcast, Travel and Shit. We're your host, D. Carrie, having an experiential conversation about the nuanced ways that travel intersects with regular life. I am happy to have you here, whether you are new or existing. It's a good time over here. I have a great time, so I'm hoping that you too will enjoy your time with me. And it is not just a me today. I love to remind you guys that not only am I adorable, I tend to have absolutely gorgeous guests. So you absolutely should feel free to tiptoe to the YouTubes, and then you can see how much talking with my hands that I actually do when you're listening. I don't know if you can maybe hear it in my intonation that maybe I'm using my hands, but if you can't, watch on YouTube. And if you're on the YouTubes, you can see the beautiful face that is joining me today. To my amazing guest, please introduce yourself.
Hey y'all, my name is Adalia Aborisade, although most people on the internet know me as PickyGirlTravelsTheWorld. I am a traveler, but I am also very much in the business of helping Black women get free from society's expectations and rules about how they're supposed to be living their life. So I'm always somewhere talking about how you can live like your dream life.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me. It's an honor to have you here. So before we dive into it, let's do like a logistics check. Like, where are you from? Are you a window seat? Are you an aisle seat girl? Have you traveled since you were a child? What is your relationship to travel? And where are you actually centered? Where are you, I don't want to say located. I feel like, what's your headquarters, I guess? Because I feel like,
I like headquarters because I do struggle when I am out and about and people ask like, oh, where are you from? Because what they really want to know is where do you live? And where I live is not where I'm from.
There we go.
I'm originally from Houston, Texas, but I call Mexico City home. I have for 4 out of the last 6 years.
Wow.
I have how long have I been traveling? I did travel as a kid. Some families are road trip families. We were not. My mother's people are from New Orleans, and so we would fly. So flying has always been my jam. And I am absolutely a window seat.
Same.
Yeah.
It's just superior. I don't know if it's I get tall people, long people, you don't want to feel like, but I'm not tall. I'm not long. It's not my not my burden to the world. I prefer the window because I want to lean on something, and I also just only want one person like next to me. I don't need people on the both sides because people passing by the aisle when that drink cart comes down, don't knock me. Don't hit my elbow.
Gosh.
You know what I mean? I don't want those. So I sit my ass on the window. One side, I pop my leg up. I put my lean on. It's comfortable. It works for me.
I don't like dealing with having to let people out to use the bathroom.
Okay.
I really don't. I don't want to deal with that at all. So I'm like, give me my window seat, leave me in my corner, and let me be.
Yeah, and I also guilty is the person that has to get up to go pee. Hi, my bladder's as small as I am. Hi, so sorry. But I'm just like, at least, I'm not like, I'm gentle. I'll at least give the people that. So what was your impetus for leaving the States? We all have a million reasons, but what was your personal deciding factor, and what exactly was, because it's kind of like a loaded question, but at the same time, it can be a very simple answer and it can be a very complicated answer. So not only was like okay, this is it, fuck this, I'm out, but then what was it that made you actively take action? Because you can always because I feel like those are two different things, right? There's I'm tired of this. I can't do this. But then there's let me pull this website up, or let me actually start this application for X, Y, and Z. Are those two things the same? What does that look like for you?
I think they are different. I am somebody who always dreamed about living outside the US. However, that did not happen for me until I was 41 years old. So, yes, two very separate things. And um, really, I blew my life up right before I turned 40. I ended
Okay.
a 20-year marriage because life is short. Life is too short to be living in such a way that you are unhappy.
Mm.
So I decided I wanted to be happy. And for me, travel was a big part of that. And doing the things I wanted to do. So I set out to do all those things I had always wanted to do. And one of them was moving abroad. There's that piece of it. And then the other piece is there is always been a values mismatch between myself and the United States.
Hmm.
And it became harder and harder to reconcile the two. I always tell people when they ask me this, there are certain things that I believe that fundamentally are like anti-American. For instance, I believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege.
Right.
I don't think getting medical care should put me in danger of financial, ruin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's some other things there too, but there's this whole list of things that I believe in, and I think that's how society should work, that just are not the way the US works, given our embracing of like American individualism and American like superiority and things like that. So for me, I was like, if I'm going to live like my best life, the place I
Mm-hmm.
can be my whole, full, happy self, that's not the United States. So I
What
was
was
like,
that place
okay.
for you?
Um, so far it's looking like Mexico. And I know when I tell people I live in Mexico City, when I tell people I live in Mexico, it's always, well, what about the cartels? Aren't you worried about getting kidnapped and all of that? So I am not somebody who is oblivious to the issues of living in this country. There are some things that Mexico really needs to do some work on.
Mm-hmm.
However, being a Black American woman, my experience living here compared to my experience living in the United States are night and day. I
Mm-hmm.
do not worry about my safety in the same way. Uh, my interaction with the police, in
Mm-hmm.
180 difference.
Mm-hmm.
So there are those things that I'm like, my life is just so much better here, but I am not oblivious to the fact that every country's going to have issues. And this one
Right.
has its own specific set of them.
So I have two questions based on what you just said. What was So let me just ask the two questions so I can get them off my chest, and then we'll circle back because I wrote them down. So, where did you live first? And in terms of, because I know you said you lived in Mexico for 4 years of the last six. So where was the first place that you went to when you decided to leave the country, and how did you choose that place? Because you had mentioned that you wanted to leave because of the misalignment of values, right? Reasonable, great reason to leave, right? But what was the first place you tried, and like why did you try that place? Like why did you choose wherever you chose first, and then like what happened? Because that was like 2 years and we're in Mexico.
Well, that was actually a year before because I left in 2016 and have been
Okay.
gone ever since. Um, Actually, the first location chose me, and it is a place that hardly anybody moves to on purpose. Most of their migration is out migration. I got a job in Honduras, in Tegucigalpa. And it's really, I was like, okay, I'm going to move. And I was also at a point where I was looking to make a career change. However,
Okay.
it occurred to me that the easiest way for me to go was to get a job in my existing career. I had
Mm,
been teaching or in K-12 education for 19 years at that point.
okay.
So,
I was gonna ask, what did you
okay.
teach?
Mostly geography, history, a little bit of technology in there.
So you had
Um,
like the middle kids, like middle, what do you call
oh,
that? Middle
no,
school,
no, no, no,
like
no,
7 to
no.
12?
High school, high school. I spent
Ooh,
2 years in
you
junior
are a
high.
warrior.
I spent 2 years in junior high, and that was not a good experience for anybody involved. Not for me, not for the kids. My sweet spot is about ninth grade in high school.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Ideally, junior year, that's when the kids figure out why they're there. However,
Okay.
I did not want to teach US history, which is primarily taught in ninth grade in Texas. So, because I've always been
Hmm.
a map girl, geography girl, I ended up in ninth
Oh,
grade.
over my head. I love history, not history that involves directions. That's where you lose me.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, I'm going to see where I can get a teaching job. And really the world was open to me. A lot of folks
Hmm.
were like, I'm going to go where the money is. That would be in Asia, China, and the Middle East at this time.
Okay.
But I kept coming back to the fact that I wanted to learn Spanish, which is funny because in school I took French. I absolutely
Okay.
never wanted to learn Spanish. I didn't like the way it sounded when it was spoken, but I found myself wanting to learn Spanish. So I was like, okay, that means Latin America. Went to a job fair. The very first school I talked to was a school in Honduras. Never considered them at all. And the position, it was as if somebody had read my resume and created a
Hmm.
position specifically for my skill set. So, you know,
Serendipity.
I
Look at
say
that.
all the time, the universe tends to unfold as it should. So I got the job there, and I knew Honduras was not my stopping point, but it was going to get me
Okay.
out the door. And the my time there was great, but again, that's another country with a set of struggles, and those
Hmm.
particular struggles were not ones that I was willing to kind of deal with long term.
Yeah.
And so my employer and myself parted ways. And then I guess we could say I took a grown up gap year. But basically, there was some restructuring at the school I was at, very teeny tiny school. And their new structure would require me basically to be the entire social studies department and do the job they hired me to do for no extra money.
Mm-mm.
And I said, no thanks,
That's
and
the same
decided
in English and Spanish.
and decided that I would not look for a job for the next year. And I was like, I'll take the year off and we'll see how this goes. And that's when I initially moved to Mexico City. Fell in love.
Mhm.
Did not want to leave.
So, did you move there for your gap year, or did you stay in Honduras for your gap year?
No, I moved to Mexico City for my gap year.
Oh, that's a big
Believe
move.
it or not, Honduras is expensive. People
Oh,
think
okay.
Central America is going to be a cheap place to live. It's very much like living on an island. Not a lot
Mm.
is made there. Everything's imported. The cost of living is higher. So Mexico was a more affordable option. It had more of the things that I knew I wanted in a place, you know, walkable neighborhoods, mass transit, a large international airport,
Mhm.
because that impacts the cost of your flights, things like that.
Yeah.
And I was here for a year. And then my youngest was getting ready to apply for college. And I was like, probably should go back to work so I can pay for college. And ended up moving to Asia. So when I say I lived in Mexico, the 4 out of the last
Okay.
6 years, I spent 2 years in Asia and then came back in July of 2020.
And it's been home since.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you live like a local yet, or do you feel like you still have some kind of tourist aspects, if you will, to your lifestyle?
I would not say that I live like a local, because I think in order to do that, I would spend most of my day speaking Spanish. And I
Okay.
don't do that for a number of reasons. One of them is that I am introverted AF, and talking to people in Spanish gives me anxiety. I get what I need to have done, but I'm not going to chit chat with you in Spanish. But I would also say I don't live like a tourist. Both times that I have lived here, I specifically chose neighborhoods that did not have a lot of foreigners in them because I
Okay.
want when I go to the restaurant or I go to the pharmacy, I want that transaction to happen in Spanish. I don't want to live in a neighborhood that has like English menus. Um, so in that way, I don't live like a tourist, but I would not say that I live like a local, but I
Okay.
would say more
Middle
so
ground.
than a lot of foreigners who come here.
So I had an internal chuckle when you said you wanted everything done in Spanish but don't speak Spanish.
It
How do you resolve that? Like, what are we doing? What?
oh oh
Why? That sounds like you're setting yourself up for so much stress.
Absolutely. It took me a while to figure this out. That because when I was taking Spanish classes, this is one of the things I asked my teacher about. I figured out that introverts and extroverts learn language differently. Um, and when I
Okay.
explained this theory to her, she was like, absolutely. Extroverts, these are the people who just speak with enthusiasm. They don't care if they're conjugating it right. They don't care if they're getting the right gender. They just go for it. And then there
Hmm.
are people like me who I got to say it the right way. I need to understand why we're using this form of the verb in this situation and not. And so there's all of that going on in my head when I try to speak Spanish. But then you add to the fact that I am introverted and I don't want to talk to people I don't know. So if it's not like a transaction, I'm keeping my
Hmm.
mouth shut. And
Copy.
when you talk to anybody about how do you successfully learn a language, how do you become fluent, you got to use the language.
That's all
So
they say is immersion.
I have signed up, like I took a screen printing class in Spanish because I was like, oh, I'll learn, I'll hear new words, which I did pick up some new vocabulary, and I'll have to communicate in Spanish. And then I realized how hard I will work to sabotage myself. So the teacher comes over and asks me in Spanish, how are things going? And I can communicate in nonverbal ways like you would
Hmm.
not believe. I can find all kind of ways not to speak Spanish. Same thing. I took salsa classes in Spanish in this was a very local neighborhood, no foreigners. I was the foreigner in the class. Um, Improved my comprehension, but I could never, when they would ask me something, I could never reply fast enough. So
But you
I've been,
understand what they're saying?
yes, but
Okay.
I couldn't form a response. So I
Hmm.
tried, one trick I tried was to put myself in situations where I had no choice but to speak Spanish. And then I work against myself. My
Hmm.
newest adventure in that department is I have applied and was accepted to an artist residency in the state of Oaxaca because,
Congratulations.
thank you, I sew most of my clothes and I wanted
That's
to
so cool.
learn like traditional dyeing techniques. And so I applied to this program. I was accepted. The artisan that I'm going to be working
You
with
applied
does
in
not speak.
Spanish?
No,
Okay. I was about to be like,
I did
you
not
are
apply in Spanish.
so
I could
good.
have. I could have filled out a form in Spanish. I can text for the most part. It's phone calls. They get me
Mm.
every time. And so I applied, I was accepted. The artisan I will be working with does not speak Spanish. Actually, Spanish is probably not their first language because it's very indigenous in that part of the country. However,
Wow. Okay.
the program will basically be in Spanish. So I have in my head that for 3 weeks, I'm going to be surrounded by folks who do not speak English. And in that situation, I do tend to find the right words. So we'll see. But yeah, this is my ongoing struggle because there's
But I think,
probably all of the words in here. I just
yeah,
don't use
because you
them.
understand it. And that's where I feel like I don't I think you are selling yourself short by saying that you don't speak Spanish. It goes right back to the point that you don't want to talk to these people. So it's like you probably speak perfectly fine. I don't want to say perfectly fine or like fluent, but like you probably speak way more conversational Spanish than you give yourself credit for. It's just that you don't want to talk. So it's like,
Yes,
well,
pretty much.
pero no
Yeah,
entiendo. Yo no sé.
pretty much.
But I think the
Any
big thing is understanding.
any conversation somebody starts with me, immediately, for me, it's fight or flight. It is,
Mm,
what can I say to make them stop talking to me immediately? But I'm that way in English too, so it's not
hmm
it's not a big shock. It just
Consistency.
it's a struggle if my goal is to learn to speak Spanish.
Okay. So I can fucking appreciate that because honestly, I was so worried about you. I'm like, oh my God, how's she gonna do all these things if she doesn't speak Spanish? No, you understand Spanish. And I feel like there needs to be another way to have that conversation with people. Well, I mean, I don't say another way, but something more readily available, like a manner to discuss it without saying, do you speak or not? Well, because there's also understanding. Do you comprehend what it is someone is saying to you? And to your point, it's like I can much better understand what someone is saying to me. And it's really context clues. And so at that point, once I get through some context clues, I can kind of point to things like, you mean this?
Hmm.
Because I don't know how to say it, but I don't mind, like, we could do the charades just as long as it ain't
Oh
Pictionary because I
yeah,
also can't
body
draw.
body language. People underestimate that. I lived in China for a year and a half, and I spoke 4 words of Mandarin. Like you can get by. I have significantly more Spanish. I furnished an apartment. I handled my own immigration process. So like, I get it done. It's not pretty, but I get it
Mhm.
done.
So you hit the magic word. Two words, immigration and process. So before we get to the immigration part, what was your process for actually divesting from the States? Like, how did you kind of prepare yourself and maybe the people around you for, hey, so I love you, but I can love you from Honduras or I can love you from Mexico. What was that like for you?
The biggest concern was my youngest daughter, who was a freshman in high school when I made the decision to leave. Because initially, after I got divorced, I was like, okay, let me get her out of high school, then I will go.
Hmm
And a friend was like, do you really have to do that? Do you really have to wait? And then the more I thought about it, I was like, technically, I don't. And I know that there are a lot of parents out there who are like, oh no, I wouldn't leave. But um, sometimes we got to choose ourselves. And
hmm
so with my youngest, I explained, this is what I want to do. And I said, if I'd like you to come with me, if there is a particular country that you would like to live in, I will look for a job in that country. And she was like, no, I'm not interested. Go do you. And okay, I did. Ended up getting the job in Honduras. And then she was like, hey, is that offer still available?
Hi,
Because
me.
I sold it to her. I was like, look, you don't have to stay there forever, because she was highly involved in like FFA, Future Farmers of America, and was doing
Huh.
her own thing.
I'm a
Um,
city girl. I have never heard.
Girl, I'm a city girl. I don't know that's where she ended up, but she did. And so I was like, we could do it like a study abroad. You can
Oh,
come stay with me for a year. She hadn't taken her foreign language at that time. I was like, you could get your Spanish credit. Like, it was an American curriculum school. And so that was probably the biggest one. Most of my friends, when I said this what I was doing, they were like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense. I have very little family. I'm from a very small family, and there aren't very many of them still around. So there wasn't this concern of like, oh, I have these obligations
yeah.
to these people, what have you.
People
Really, it,
aging, taken care
yeah, it
of. You don't
was
want to leave
about
this person.
my children, and outside of that, not so much. And then like the process piece of it, um, well, because I one of the things I do now is help people move abroad. It really depends, because if you're moving abroad for a job, your job should handle a lot of
Yeah.
that piece. But like getting like closing down my life, that was mostly about getting rid of the last stuff I had. With my divorce, I am a minimalist and I was married to somebody who was probably a low grade hoarder. So for me, I had already purged a lot of stuff and was
Yeah.
already living, like finally getting to live my minimalist dream. So there wasn't this whole thing of like, oh, how am I going to let go of this sentimental thing, this sentimental thing? It was really about,
Hmm.
okay, what can I sell? What can I donate? What can I give? And one of the things that I did was I, one thing I am is very like practical. And the reality is when we die, the people we leave behind got to go through our shit. It is
Sure
never
do.
going to mean as much to them as it does to you. So like
That's a good
I
point.
had all of these pictures of my child from my childhood, but I was like, okay, I die. My kids go through these. Outside of me in these pictures, my children aren't going to know who any of these people are. So why am I holding on to that? Like I had all of my high school yearbooks. So I went through and I gave things to people that's like, well, if I was dying, I would want you to have this anyway. So why
Yeah.
not give it to you now? So I did that piece. And then everything else sort of fell into place. My lease was coming up, my car, I had just paid off my car. So, like, closing down my life was fairly simple, I feel.
Yeah. What about your you have adult children? How
Yes,
did they
my
feel? Because I know like the emotional part of like one thing I'm seeing as an adult child now, hey mom, is that you're always somebody's kid. That changes as you both get older and God willing, everybody matures and you kind of come into, all right, I see why this may have happened this way. Or, you have your own come to Jesus with your parents. But what was it like I can't ask like for them because they're not here to answer, but for your reception of how they were, what was it like for even your adult kids? Because I can't imagine my mama just up and leaving me now. I'm like, girl, I'm going to watch my kids if I have them.
well, and I don't know if it's because by the time I'd left, I think I'd been divorced a year, a year or two. I don't know if because that had already happened because she was out doing her own thing. It was very much, okay, well, she was more concerned with things like, okay, well, how will I be able to call you? And I was like, I got a Google Voice number. Like, that's not going to
Yeah.
change. She was sort of nonplussed by it. I now have three grandchildren. And for them, Dee Dee just lives in Mexico. Like I
Hmm.
come and I hang out. The oldest came and visited me this summer, and it's just kind of like this is what it looks like. It looks different, but I'm because of the way I live my life now. Like when one of the kids got COVID and she needed help, I was like, I can come fly back. Like that's the other
Yeah.
benefit of being in Mexico. It's a 2 hour flight to Houston.
Oh, right. You right in Texas anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're literally right there. That is right
So
there. And I think go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, so there wasn't this whole like, I at least to me, it didn't seem like she felt like I was abandoning her. I was just
Hmm.
a few hours away.
Yeah. I think that proximity makes like a huge difference. But one thing that I think some people may not necessarily immediately think of is that there is no better way to be an example other than by action. And you can talk to your kids and prophesize and just pour into them all the ways that they are strong and they are capable, that they can do things, that they should experience life to the fullest and take risks. And what does that look like if you've never left or if you've never done anything big for your kids to say, she was talking all that hot shit and then she was about that. She stood 10 toes down. You know what I mean? She stood on
Yes,
business.
and that's what I wanted. I wanted that when I was gone, that they could look back and be able to say, well, she did it. Like
Hmm.
she thought this was important. She wanted to do this thing. She did it. She didn't just talk about it. She actually did it.
Yeah. That I can't think of and then also everybody's different. And I think some people just assume that everybody like has needy kids. One thing that I have always think I like intrinsically known, but then like you get the words, you get the language for it. You can't parent the kids that you want. You have to parent the kids in front of you. Like you have to parent the kids that you have.
Oh,
And you could
absolutely.
feel like, oh my God, how could she leave her kids? But if she's got kids that, are explorers or that are into, like, I just feel as if I want more perspectives and more um, representations of different families and different familial structures because I feel as if there are so many, I don't just say binary because it's not binary, but there's so much more to ways that people live.
Well, and that's the other piece of it. It is particularly for Black women. This is what
Hmm.
you're supposed to do. This is what a mother
Yeah.
is supposed to do. So there probably were, because I don't really care what people think, but I'm sure there were some people that had something to say.
Hmm.
Like when my youngest decided she wanted to go back to Texas, I moved to Mexico. And it's like, well, you're not there. She has another parent. Like all
Hmm.
of these rules about what a
Hmm.
woman is supposed to do, what you're supposed to do because you're a mom. That's that's one of my biggest beefs is basically in our culture, mother is supposed to be a martyr. She's supposed to
Yes.
sacrifice everything for everybody. And I reject that wholeheartedly. So, me living my life in this way, I definitely wanted my daughters to see like there are other ways you can be a woman, and no
Functionally.
one way is the right way.
Hmm. And you can do it happily and functionally. And
Yes.
I applaud you for taking that stand because, and I absolutely wanted to ask that because I didn't want that to be a lingering question anyone had, and then they weren't able to hear what you were going to say further. They got just stuck on that, and it's just like I wanted you to give a little space for you to flesh that out a little bit more. You kind of mentioned it, but in terms of the divesting and you starting in Honduras, you got a job there. Now, your job will take care a lot of the, what's the right word for it? Like the citizenship portion of it or the
Residency.
immigration. Thank you. The residency, the paperwork and that nature. But what about banking? Like, do you still have like an American bank account? Do they make you open, or do they open a bank account for you in that native country? What do those like? Do you have to, or not have to, well, or did you renounce your American citizenship? Are you a citizen of Mexico at this point? Like, what did those points of it? And then also, it's like you have a life of financial history in the United States. What does that look like going to Mexico? Because I feel like that's something that I haven't done any research into. I haven't heard, but it's just so I've got a credit history here. Do they use credit in Mexico? What are the, because it's easy to just say, I've got $1,500, baby, and I'm going to make it work. What does Mexico think about that?
Well, um, you're right. When you have a job, they take care of the visa, whatever that situation is, so that you can legally be in the country, you can legally work there. So when that was one of the kind of eye-opening things, because when I came to Mexico, I was doing everything myself. I had to find the apartment. I had to, figure out how can I be
Mhm.
in the country legally, all of that. When I was in Honduras, um, because of they pay you by direct deposit. When you live abroad, they generally pay you once a month. um, and so yeah, that takes some getting used to. And so
I was going to say,
we had a day where they took the new people to the bank and they provided somebody who spoke Spanish to do that. Fast forward to me living in Mexico. I get a Mexican bank account, which you can get by without one, but I wanted one. I had to navigate that all by myself with the
I could
amount of
barely
Spanish
navigate
I
it in fucking
had.
English. My lord.
Yes, it's so. moving abroad on your own individually definitely requires a lot more like being able to keep your knees bent and go with the flow and problem solve, because
Mm.
what you read on the website said this. You got all your paperwork to match that. You go to get in line and they're like, no, that's not what you need. And you say, but the website said, don't nobody care what the website said. This is the process we do in a day. My friend came
Yeah.
last week. It was different. Yeah, but this is the process we're doing today.
Yeah.
Um, and then your question about like your financial history and all of that in the US. I run across a lot of people who are leaving the US because they're like, this ain't it for me. I don't want to have anything to do with this place. While in theory, that sounds great. It's a really bad idea to close your US bank account, to let your US driver's license expire,
Mhm.
to not have a US number, because American citizens, no matter, even if they have citizenship somewhere else, always have to file a US tax return. That gets really complicated when you don't have a bank account. So, like during the pandemic, when they gave out the
The
stimulus,
stipend checks. Oh yeah,
okay,
yeah.
a lot of
Stimulus.
people who had gotten rid of their US bank accounts, there was nowhere for the government to deposit that money. You can't take a check, a paper check from the US government to the bank in China and be like, can y'all cash this check in US dollars for me? No.
Hmm.
So I always tell people, leave that stuff open. Then there is always the chance something may happen where you have to go back, and trying to rebuild all of that. That's struggle you don't have to have.
Yeah.
Now, I have not. I am still a U.S. citizen. A lot of people who move abroad like the idea of being able to renounce their U.S. citizenship, like Tina Turner did. Here's what people don't realize. One, you have to pay to do that.
Go the
It's
fuck
not
figure.
free. It is a whole process, and they make you pay
That is
for
some
that.
American shit, if ever.
And then here's
Yes.
the other thing. Um, when you do that, first of all, you have to be a citizen of another country. You cannot be a stateless person.
Okay.
So
Mm.
you have to get citizenship somewhere else. But when you do that, when you give up your U.S. citizenship, you no longer have the right to be in the US. You are subject to whatever the visa requirements are for the country you have a passport in. So let's say I got Mexican citizenship, which I will be eligible for, I think, in a year, maybe
Oh,
6 months.
cool.
Okay. Um, I have property in the US. My grandkids are in the US. If I gave up my US citizenship and had a Mexican passport, I am subject to the visa requirements that Mexicans are. It is
Hmm.
hard as hell for a Mexican to get a visa to come to the US. So, like, and then like let's say you like I technically I'm entitled to a Nigerian passport, okay, because I'm
Okay.
half Nigerian. Let's say I did that. Okay. And I give up my US passport. How am I getting the US? I'm subject to the way they treat people who are from this other country. So,
Hmm.
although it sounds like, yes, I want to tell this country where to stick it and I don't ever want to deal with them again, the reality is it is very impractical for the vast majority of people to give up US citizenship. What I do have, I have permanent residency here in Mexico. I
Hmm.
have the right to live here. I have the right to work here um, indefinitely.
Beautiful.
Every country does not work that way, but in Mexico, that is how it works. When I lived in China, when I lived in Kuwait, I had work visas, so my ability to be in the country was directly tied to my job.
Yeah. Okay.
No job, can't stay there. So that all varies. Um, I am not interested. Well, I take that back. I wouldn't mind an EU passport.
Okay.
I wouldn't mind it.
The world lets some
Uh,
people kind of go just as freely as we
yeah,
can.
like
Some
I
others.
wouldn't mind it, but ideally, at some point, I would probably like to get residency in at least one other country,
Hmm.
because I had gotten I had a I had a visa, a work visa actually, when I lived here before. And then I moved to Asia, it expired. But one
Mhm.
of the years I was living in Asia, I was like, I know eventually I'll end up back in Mexico. So I came back and I did my own independent immigration process, got my residency visa. And then a global pandemic happened and
Mhm.
countries started closing their borders. And all of a sudden, people were like, well, you can't come here if you don't live here. But I have Mexican residency. So when I was leaving China, I was like, I know I don't want to go to the US, but I know Mexico got to
Mhm.
take me. I mean, turns out Mexico never closed their borders, but if they had, I still would have been okay.
Yeah.
And so that's why I always encourage people, if there's a place you want to be, go ahead and get residency. Because that way,
Okay.
particularly for Black folks, because white folks can get away with a whole lot of stuff we can't. You know, when
Absolutely.
when folks start looking around for people to put out their country, people who are there illegally,
Hmm.
they're gonna pick us first. So I would much rather have my paperwork completely in order.
Yeah. And can you have residence? You were mentioning that you would look for residency in another country, so you can have multiple countries where you have permanent residency.
Yep, it's all
Oh, fucking
about
cool.
what the country's rules are. So, like, I have friends who have permanent residency in Mexico and they have temporary residency in Portugal. Portugal
Okay.
requires you to be in the country for a specific number of months. Mexico does not. So, them being in Portugal, maintaining their Portuguese residency does not impact their Mexican residency at
Right.
all. And now that's different than citizenship because some countries
Mhm.
will support uh, dual citizenship, triple citizenship, whatever. And then some countries are like, no, you can be a citizen of here and only here. But residency, generally speaking, as long as you can meet whatever requirements they have about like how much time you got to spend in the
Mhm.
country, you can have as many as you want.
That's pretty fucking interesting. How long does it take you to get to residency status?
It depends on the country.
Mhm.
Mexico is, in comparison, easy.
Okay.
Basically, they want to know if you don't have a job now, if you're trying to work here. People often get surprised by this. Just like in the United States, we don't want to give jobs to foreigners. Every other
Mhm.
country is like that too. So, in order for, like, when I had a work visa here, the company I worked for had to have permission to hire foreigners. They had to go to immigration and argue that by hiring me, there was not a Mexican with the same qualifications that could do the job. And
Hmm.
so, because they want to save jobs for the local people. So, this is why people often struggle to get like work visas in Europe,
Okay.
because if you're not from another European country, it's very hard to break in unless you do something really, really special. Um, so that's probably the hardest way to go. The visa I have, basically, I needed to prove I had a certain amount of money. I proved that. They were like, okay, here's your visa.
Okay. Because I'd heard about certain even like the digital nomad visas that they were doing in a couple of different countries while they were trying to kind of get people back in seats on in the air. It was, oh, you could work here, you could work there, this, that,
Yeah.
and the third. But then it was just like, oh, there are thresholds. Okay. And I
Yes.
remember I did an episode someplace. I don't remember where it was. I think it was someplace, I want to say it was someplace European, and they were trying to do the same thing for tourism, though. Like even for tourists, we kind of want to. Damn, I gotta look. I gotta figure out a way if I could look up what episode that was. It was so interesting, and I think I actually know which one it was. But they were trying to put caps on the like caps not by numbers, but just by how much your personal numbers are. Like, what is your income? What do you make? And yes or no, you can now come here. Now, I don't know if that article had fully fleshed out all the details. So I don't want to talk hot shit on somebody's country if I don't have all the information. But it was obviously a white ass country, but
Well,
it was
I'm gonna talk hot shit on the United States. A friend, somebody I work with in El Salvador. Well, no, it's not the United States, but it's the United States and Mexico. they're both guilty
Mhm.
of this. We were looking at how he could get a tourist visa, not he's just trying to visit. And the financial paperwork that people from countries with less powerful passports, they have to like provide proof that they've got not only the money to afford to be there, but that they have substantial economic ties to their country so that
So
they're
they
not going
access
to
go back.
overstay, that they're going to be able to prove they're going to go back.
Mhm.
And so there there are I think this is one of the things a lot of Americans, US Americans, miss is the privilege of having a US passport. That there are, what is it,
Absolutely.
85 185 countries that we can go to visa free, that we just show up with that little blue passport and we can get in. And there are so many people who are like, no, just to go on vacation, I have to
Mhm.
submit this entire dossier of my financial life to prove
Your
to these
whole
people
personal life. Who
that I
you
just
live
want
with,
to
your
be there for a little
parents.
bit. Yep.
I remember I went to, well, I had a layover in China, and I was in Shanghai. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Shanghai. And I had booked a tour, and I was talking with the tour guide, and she had put me onto that. She was saying that her visa process to come to the United States was like wild pages, like 20 something pages, 40 something pages, I don't know. And she was telling me all of the things that they're asking. Who do you live with? What do you do? Especially considering she didn't necessarily have a traditional job either. She was self employed. She was a tattoo artist and she does tours. So it's like they wanted to be all the way in her business. And it had never occurred to me. First of all, in fairness to me, I didn't leave the country until I was 30. So what the fuck I need to know about a visa? I had no point of reference. There was no scope of information for me. But it is one of those things where unless somebody tells you, you don't fucking know. These people go through so much, just to your point, just to go on fucking vacation. Just to go on
Yeah.
vacation. And so when I see all of the the tour buses of Chinese people are everywhere. When I tell you like all the places, I don't know why I was so surprised, but I was caught off guard with that one. But when you see all of them, it's just, I wonder if there are tourism agencies that also do that paperwork for them, the visa agents, because I can't see being that committed. If my process looked like that, I don't think I'd be as traveled as I am. I don't think that I would be able to do, but I don't like paperwork as it is. Give me one
Exactly.
sheet. I don't want to fill it out. I'll rethink it. I'll pay full price if that's even it. But having to go through all of that I wouldn't, I don't think that there are, and that's making me kind of want to look into the travel influencer or like the travel, I don't say influencer in terms of like just people that travel and talk about the shit that are from other countries. Like, oh, now I'm curious. Well, what is your life? How are you able to move so freely? What is your passport privilege, or what is it that your financial access allows you to see that citizens of the country you're from can't all take advantage of? That's a
You'll notice with influencers that are not from the US, they're not from Europe. You'll notice, or at least I've noticed, a lot of them, the countries that they go to, like they might have a lot
mm,
of Caribbean content because that's probably the places that they can get in and out of most easily. That's probably, I just found a young lady. She's from, I want to say Ghana. Is an African
okay.
country. And I'm sitting here marveling at like, look at all the places you've been because I know the amount of work it took
Hello.
her to get visas to all those places. That's why I have not been to Vietnam because
Mm,
Americans, US Americans need a visa and I don't like paperwork. That's why I said Mexico's residency process is fairly straightforward, fairly simple when you compare it to other places.
yeah.
And so I too do not like paperwork. So give me the path of least resistance.
Absolutely. Every time, twice even. Do you get a passport when you're a resident?
No, I have a, well, we used to call them green cards. They're not green anymore, but basically the equivalent of a green card. When I leave and enter the country, I need to show that to so that
Mhm.
they can keep track of when I'm here and when I'm not. It doesn't matter when I'm here, but I can't, if I enter as a tourist, I lose my residency status. And so,
Oh,
uh, yeah, I
how do you
lost my
enter
resident.
as a tourist? How does that work?
Okay.
Like if you physically lose the card?
If you don't have the card to prove, like now that the system is more electronic, in
Mhm.
theory they can look it up, but um when I come back in, I have to show my residency card. And in Mexico, they stamp your passport. They either stamp it as a tourist and then they put how many days you can stay,
Right.
or they stamp it that you've got residency. And so, because a lot of people get 6 months when they come, and because I'm an obvious foreigner, if I don't say something when I go through immigration, they might just
Mm,
assume, oh, she's an American here on vacation 6 months. If they do that,
right.
Mexico has made it very clear, you lose residency. You have to start the entire process all over. I don't want to do that.
Mm, mm,
So I'm very conscientious about making sure that I enter the country the proper way. Um,
mm.
I've seen so many posts. Somebody just said like their kid came home to visit from college and they didn't show their card. They just told the person, I'm a resident. And I don't know if this conversation happened in Spanish or English. According to the mom, the agent was like, yeah, we know, and then promptly wrote tourist
Mhm.
180 days in their passport. And she's like, well, what do I do? And we're all like, girl, he lost his residency. Like,
Damn.
yeah. So I don't now.
Administrative
If I
errors.
had citizenship somewhere, I would have a passport. And something else to think about with that: if, let's say, I were to get Mexican citizenship, I probably won't, because unlike other countries, Mexico is a place that when you become a naturalized citizen, there are rules about how much time you have to be in the country.
Okay.
Usually, it's the other way around. Once you become a citizen, they don't care when you come and go.
Hmm.
But if I were to do that, you know, this idea we have about like, oh, you run into trouble, you call the US Embassy. Well, once
Mm.
I'm a Mexican citizen, the US Embassy is like, no, girl, you a Mexican citizen.
We don't know
Talk
you.
talk to them people. Like,
Yeah.
there are no protections for me in that way. When you have, because you have to enter, I would have to enter Mexico with my Mexican passport. I would enter the US with my US passport. So
Okay.
that's something else to consider, that when you become a citizen of a place, like, you are subject to their laws. If they have a mandatory military service thing, you are subject to that because you are now a
Yeah.
citizen.
You might want to pay attention to that. 'Cause I ain't. I ain't fighting. So when you mentioned that you are a minimalist, that I assumed to be the tangibles of the things, like your personal belongings, your items. What did that financially look like for you? I know that, the money aspect of it. Did you have a certain amount saved? Did you like, how do you suggest people financially prepare themselves for a move? Because there's also when people say, oh yeah, when you travel you might want to exchange currency, or maybe you don't have a card with no foreign transaction fees. Like, can you use your same credit cards? Did you have investments? Do you leave your investments in the state? Is there a way that you can roll over investments to another country? Because I mean, if you have the wherewithal to invest in the states, I'm assuming that you might be tickled and want to invest in a different country. Like, what do the financial ends of it look like?
Um, we'll start with the investment piece. That's something people need to be careful about, because there are certain types of investments that if you do them in other countries, like PFIC, which I cannot remember what the letters stand for, PFIC. But if you go to the IRS website and you search that, you will find out that it's basically passive foreign, and then I forget what the I and the C are. But if I were to invest in foreign based mutual funds, the
Okay.
the the IRS punitively taxes those investments.
Wow.
So that would not be a good move for me. If I wanted to invest in another country, I might need to think about what type of
Okay.
investment. Maybe it is real estate. Maybe
Mhm.
it is like I want to buy individual stocks or something like that. But there are some rules there to be aware of. All of my investment accounts are still in the US for the way, because I am trying to be a minimalist in all things, including financial things. It's simpler for me that way versus because I don't want to deal with complicated taxes. So if I had investments, let's think about all the countries I've worked in, Honduras, China,
Right.
Kuwait, Mexico. There is one, what does that do for me at tax time? What's my paperwork? Who am I
Mhm.
obligated to file taxes with,
Yeah.
report, all of that? There's that piece. The other piece is I'm almost 50. I am not going to live forever. What kind of mess am I leaving behind for my children? I know who my kids are. They are not
Mhm.
the kind of people who are like, oh, mama owned this property in this other country. Let me go see about it. No, they would probably just
Mhm.
let it get turned over to the state or whatever. So I have structured my finances in such a way that when I do die, it will be as easy as possible for my children to deal with. If I was a younger person, or if my children were more internationally inclined, I might approach things differently. Um, but there's that piece of it. There's also the piece of there are people who like they spend a big chunk of their working life abroad, and so they have like retirement funds in that country, and then
Mhm.
they're ready to leave, and they're like, okay, so how do I move this back to my other country? It can be done. It just seems like a lot of work and complication, and I don't want to deal with that.
Mhm.
As far as like accessing your money, this is one of the things you have to think about. I learned this the hard way. Um,
Mhm.
being in Honduras, it wasn't that big of a deal until I was trying to get my money out of the country. Same thing in China, because like checks are not a thing in a lot of other places. You could do wire transfers, but those can be expensive.
Yeah.
Then you've got a country like China that it is illegal to have RMB outside of China. They have very strict controls. Like you can't, there are some people who, and I don't recommend this, who exchange currency at their local bank in the US because they want
Mhm.
to have the cash in hand. You can't do that in China. You can only get RMB when you are in China. So I'm getting paid. How do I get my money to my American bank account? I could go spend 3 to 5 hours at the bank in person to do a wire transfer, or I need to figure out some other situation. Um, Luckily, somebody I worked with in Honduras hooked me up with a way to get a cashier's check in USD and then use my American Bank's phone app to deposit the check.
Okay.
That works for
Yeah.
me. That worked for me in Honduras. That worked for me in Kuwait. In
So you
China, it
deposit it in
was
your American bank and then just transfer the funds to like your foreign bank?
no. So, like, I would get paid when I worked in Honduras, I get paid in local currency and in USD. And what I did was I lived in Honduras on the local currency. My
Mhm.
USD, it was like, okay, I need to get this out. I can either carry a ton of cash with me. No.
I see what you're saying. No, you just did the banking app. Yeah.
Yes. So I had to go to the bank in person. I had to go to the international desk, have pay to get a cashier's check in USD. And then I deposited that on the phone. Could not do that in
Copy.
China.
I
China
didn't even know that
was so much more
you could do
complicated.
cashier's check. Yeah, honestly, I'd have just now. Okay, so reasonably, you're gonna have a lot more money to transfer than tourist me is gonna have. Like
Yes.
this is salary. This is your paycheck. This isn't like I took $500 out and I've got
Yeah.
like $220 left. They're not going to notice this much cash in my pocket. Probably won't.
No.
But like So you feel comfortable walking around with like $12,000, like, or do you want to maybe like not be a target or
Yeah.
lose it, or God forbid, like anything could fucking happen? And then what do you do with it when you get to the States? Like you can't do nothing with it.
No, I had that happen to me when I left Honduras. I emptied out my bank account. And so I had something like 50,000 Honduran Lempira. Okay. I go to the currency exchange in the United States and they looked at me like, girl, we ain't taking that. Like, they were like, because there are certain
We're not
currencies that are
taking your
kind of
drug money here. That's
that
mad
were
money.
that were weak because the plan was they didn't at the airport in Tegucigalpa, they did not have a currency exchange. They were like, there's the money man. He stands over by the rental cars. And I was like, excuse me? And they were like, yeah, the money man. You'll
Sounds
see him.
suspect.
He has on like this cargo vest. And so it happened
Greg,
that,
Greg, the guy
yeah,
out there. Wow.
it,
Okay.
it happened that my flight was very early in the morning and the money man was not there.
Of
So
course
I
not.
had this big stack of Honduran Lempira that I just shoved in my bag. And then I get to the United States with it. And I thought,
Damn.
last ditch effort, let me go. There's like this international money exchange thing. I go there and they're like, oh no, we do not take that currency. Cause like I've run into that with Ghanaian SETI. If you're not in Ghana, nobody's going to take that. It just so
Wow.
happened I had a friend who was building a house in Honduras. So I was like, here, why don't y'all give me dollars for this money? And then you don't have to go to the ATM when you go. But otherwise, I
Or
would have
go
been
see
stuck.
Greg or the man.
I was going to be stuck with this money that I could not exchange. So, like in China, I was very concerned about getting my money out because it is a communist country. At any
Yeah.
point, the government could be like, we season everybody's bank
Change your
accounts.
minds.
So, like being able to
Safest
move
thing.
money back and forth is something you need to think about. For example,
Yeah.
a lot of Central America and Latin American countries, people live in the US and they send money back. They remit money to the people back home. So it's very easy to send money to Mexico. Uh, PayPal will do it,
Yeah.
Western Union, all of them. But when you make money here and you want to send it to the US, there's virtually nobody that does that.
That's crazy.
So that's something you have to think about is what's my money flow? Like which accounts am I using? How am I moving? Am I going to need to move money
Hmm.
both directions, only one direction? That's something to think about.
I tell you, I wouldn't have thought. I wouldn't have thought of it. I'd have been stuck looking for the money man with all this cash. Before I let you go, what do you do in these places? Like, what is it that like you live abroad, and we've had this fantastic conversation about it. But what do you do abroad?
Well,
Do you just sit
I
and be fine? Like,
I do.
like
I do as little as possible. I when I went back to China in 2019 because I had a year left on my contract. Soon as I landed, I was reminded of all the things that I don't like about China, and I was like, okay, this is it. This job is getting in my way. Um, I need to do something else. So I officially like retired from teaching in June of 2020. And then I was like, okay, I don't know what I want to do. I'll figure out something. And that is when I focused on, I do financial education because a lot of the reason why I could decide at 45, I don't want to teach anymore is because I had built up an investment nest egg that like, I having money wasn't like, oh no, I'm going to starve. Right. So I started my coaching business and I work with people to help them learn, financial literacy, how to manage their money, that sort of thing. And that has grown into some other things, including um, I host retreats with a business partner who I met here in Mexico City. She is a life and leadership coach. Um, just wrapped up one last week in El Salvador. We host retreats around the world. So just wrapped up one in El Salvador, got another one coming up in February. So I do struggle with when people ask, like, well, what do you do? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do some different things, but everything
a little bit of
that
that.
I everything that I do, because I remember I told you, like, I changed my life and was like, I want to live my life in such a way that one, I can center travel, and two, I'm only doing work that I enjoy. And so
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy helping empower people when it comes to their finances. And I enjoy helping women in particular kind of like break up with society's expectations. And so I get to combine all of that in the work that we do at the retreat. So that's what I do. So I guess technically I'm an entrepreneur. I work for myself, although that is not a title I would give myself. But I
Honestly,
think
you could still tell
technically,
people you're an educator because you're still
yeah,
educating. You're
yeah.
still an educator between the financial education and then the coaching business, and then also in the retreats. Like, what kind of retreats do you guys do? Are you doing like the yoga retreats? Are you doing is it a financial retreat?
It it's it's a new genre of retreat that I've been telling my
Oh,
partner we
do
need to come
tell.
up with a name for it, because what we do is there is a coaching element, but there is
Hmm.
also an educational piece. Like I told you, former history and geography teacher here. So the participants who come get coaching from us, but they also get to learn about the place that we're in. And so
Cool.
we partnered with a couple of our partners really focus on like regenerative tourism, where that
Hmm.
we are learning about the place from the people who live there. We
Hmm.
are doing it in such a way that it is not extractive. Like we
Hmm.
are the companies we work with provide they pay above fair wages.
Yeah.
So for instance, our retreat in El Salvador, not only do you get a coaching session with us every day about like how to live your dream life, getting an action plan in order to do
Hmm.
that. You also get to experience the country and you get to learn about it. So, like in El Salvador, one of the things that participants do is the history of surf. It is a very popular place for surfing. And then, if they want, they get to learn how to surf. Um, we do a little bit of glamping on a volcano overlooking the Gulf of Fonseca, where you can see Honduras on one side and Nicaragua on another. Um, so it's a cultural retreat, but it's also a coaching
Hmm.
retreat. It's like I said, we got to come up with a name for this genre, because I've never seen anything that's quite
Hmm.
like it. Um, but yeah, that's what we do.
I am always marveled by people who find their way in the world so intentionally. Like, you have carved out this piece of life for yourself. And I, such a fucking flex. Such a fucking flex. Because we all, I don't want to say we all, I can't speak for all of y'all. I don't like my full time. Like, I don't like my real fucking job, right? But I do it because I like the money. The money pays for all the things. And it's not that I don't appreciate my job, because everybody's like, oh, well, you should be grateful for this and you should be grateful that you don't have this. And yes, all those things. And also, like, both things can be true. I can be grateful that I am
And
not destitute somewhere, that I am not, gravely ill. I can be grateful for all of those things and still fundamentally want to say, fuck these people every single day. I'm going to go in there and make this money. They don't pay me to be happy. They just pay me to be there. But the point is that it is not easy to divest from that. It is not
no,
easy to walk away from the comfort of what you know. So I commend you. And I always admire people that are not only able to, because that's why I started with what was your reason, but then what was it that really was like, nah, because I've had plenty of reasons to be like, no, fuck this job, but I haven't had the, oh no, it was this right here. And now I'm pulling the papers out and I'm looking for, all the applications because I got to go like yesterday. So I am truly marveled by people like you who are able to, that's a certain level of dedication. It is
Here's the
very
thing
admirable.
that became very clear to me when I turned 40, and I say this all the time: something magical happens when a woman turns 40. Um, you start to contemplate your mortality, and you start to really examine your life and ask questions like, is this it? If this is as good as it gets, am I happy with this? And I asked myself that question, and I was not. So what we were talking about before, you can either talk about it or you can do the
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I decided I wanted to live a life that made me happy. I'd spent so much of my life being unhappy and being miserable. I was like, I want to do things that make me happy. And I set out on this journey of figuring out, what are those things. Like I tried some things when I stopped working a traditional job. I tried some things. Some of them I was like, I love this, and some of them I was like, no, I don't care how much money you
Mm-hmm.
pay me, I don't want to do this. Um and I think it looks different for everybody, but I hope
Absolutely.
if people walk away from this with nothing else, I hope they walk away with the idea that there is nothing special about me. Anybody can live a life that they love, that maybe doesn't fit the box. Because I say this all the time: my life looks like, to some people, I'm losing over here. Like, I don't own a house, I don't own a car. I'm not doing the things.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm
Those
living
check
my life.
boxes.
Yeah, I'm not doing those things, but I am living my life exactly the way I want. And it doesn't really matter what other people think, but it is possible to do that. I think, particularly in the US, we get very caught up in how life is supposed to look, and
Yeah.
that it can only look a certain way. And I just want people to know that no, you can make it up. Like, cuz none of the rules are real anyway.
Sure
This
shit not. And they definitely not the same for everybody.
No. So if nothing else, if somebody looks at me and they're like, "Well, look at that wild shit she's doing." You can do your own wild shit. You just got
Mm-hmm.
to
I
figure
think
out what
leaving your
it is.
toothbrush in a public bathroom is wild, but hello. We not all built the same.
Yeah, you just got to figure out what it is that you want, and then figure out, okay, what I got to do to make that happen.
So where can the people find you should they decide that, you know what? I need a little bit. I need a little bit of assistance. I need a little coach, another nudgy nudge.
Um, if they are interested in any kind of coaching, like I've run an investment challenge and all of that, you can find all of that stuff at my website, PickyGirlTravelsTheWorld.com. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, you're also interested in moving abroad, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about all that kind of stuff as well. Picky Girl Travels the World, or Adalia Aborisade. You can find me that way. Um, Primarily YouTube, because I was gonna say I have an Instagram, but I don't
I
post
feel
on
you.
Instagram
I feel. I
like
felt because
I'm supposed to. If my circuitous description of our retreats have intrigued you, um our retreats are called Reclaim the Retreat. It is a retreat for women and femmes who want to reclaim their peace, their happiness, their life. And so if you go to reclaimtheretreat.com, you can see the countries that we're going to in 2024, and look at the itineraries for each of the retreats to see if it's something that might be what you need.
and come on and femmes. I love an inclusive space. I
Oh yeah.
love a fucking inclusive
I am
space.
I'm old. but my business partner is a millennial, a younger millennial. So, she helps me with things like that because I'm still trying to learn. But yeah.
As long as you are open to learning, the learning will fall all in. Delia, thank you so much for joining me. It was such a pleasure to have you and to talk with you this evening. I I am claiming that someplace in the financial sphere of the world, I'm gonna have the coins to show up to one of them retreats because I too am intrigued with your hybrid approach to not just traveling, but to also tapping into self. I'm very big on travel is so much more than vacation. And I believe in intentional traveling. And I can't think of a better intentional way than to do the social things that I like doing. And I don't mean social by the idea that I want to talk to strangers, but the social aspect. And I'd rather see how people live. I'd rather see what happens here versus, bring me to this shopping mall.
Yeah. No.
Not the shopping girl, not my bag.
No, we're not doing that.
Hmm.
We're getting down with the locals, led by
To the
them,
people,
uh giving back in a way. And it is educational, but it's like also fun
enjoyable.
and
Yeah,
enjoyable. And then you get this community of other women who are also like trying to do things differently. And I know
that's
that
it.
that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this, because often when you are trying to do something different, the people in your life may not get it. And you
Yeah,
need like some sister friends who are like, okay,
community.
I'm trying to do something different too. So we'd love to have you.
I'd love to be there. I
Thank
hope
you
y'all
for
check
having me.
out all of the different areas. It's been my pleasure. Um, all the information obviously will be in the description box. So click on down, browse around. But that's it for me in this week's episode. I hope y'all have had a fan fucking tastic time, and hopefully I'll see you next week as well. Bye, good people.